Let me cast your mind back to October 2022. Arsenal were top of the league going into the World Cup break, playing at a 100-point pace and were flying on all cylinders. This was all thanks to, in part, an attack that had been transformed by an elusive Gabriel Jesus. Fast forward 18 months, and according to reliable Athletic journalist James McNicholas, Arsenal were ready to part ways with Jesus if they were to receive a suitable offer in the summer. So, what's happened to the Brazilian? How have we found ourselves in the position where he's deemed surplus to requirements when not that long ago he was deemed absolutely essential to our system functioning? And are Arsenal correct in their stance of being willing to shift him on if they are to receive a suitable offer? Firstly, I think it's important for me to say I've always been a strong advocate for the player. I've battled long and hard in discussions surrounding his poor finishing, desperately defending him as I've always felt he offers so much to the team and still manages to get chances at a rate where he can still contribute as a reliable goalscorer. So it's fair to say I may not be the most impartial, but I would say my beliefs in the player have changed somewhat in recent months. With a recurring knee injury continuing to plague him and a slightly different profile of striker Kai Havertz thriving in our system, I've begun to accept that Jesus may not be that indispensable cog I once thought he was. I'll admit, when he joined I fell in love with the player, and his first 3 months of the club justified this love. As a fan base, we've become accustomed to an ageing Alex Lacazette, whose physical capability had diminished to the extent that when he was asked with dropping deep and facilitating this build-up, he was completely also incapable of finding himself in the box as a goal threat. Jesus came in and could do both and more. He was exceptional at dropping in and linking the play, he could peel out wide and combine with the wingers, and his incredible feet and close control meant his dribbling in tight spaces was both exciting to watch and effective. His pressing and defensive work was better than anything I've ever seen in any other striker, and for me it meant that our press became considerably more cohesive and was a big reason why we made drastic improvements last season. And whilst doing all of this, he was also a massive goal threat. His 0.5 non-penalty expected goals per 90 last season placed him in the 92nd percentile for this metric, meaning he was getting a good number of high quality chances in the top 8% for strikers in Europe's top 5 leagues. Yes, his finishing wasn't great, he was constantly underperforming XG, but the volume of chances he got meant he still finished the league season with 11 goals. This may not sound like a particularly impressive goal tally, but he did miss 3 months through injury, and ultimately finished the campaign with 0.48 goals per 90, a goal almost every other game, placing him in the 75th percentile for this metric. While posting a goal scoring rate in the top 25% for Europe's top 5 league strikers isn't elite, it was an acceptable rate given everything else he offered that contributed to us scoring more league goals than we've ever scored in a season. He was providing a good number of goals, but also was the focal point in everything that allowed our attack to flourish last season. He had transformed us. Things have changed now, however. I mentioned injuries there, and that is the best place to start when explaining his downfall. During the hectic month of October 2022, in which Arsenal played a staggering 9 games, reports have indicated that Jesus began to feel pain in his knee. He played through it out of a desire not to be ruled out of the World Cup. However, just a couple games into the tournament, it became apparent he couldn't play through this pain and he had to pull out of the Brazil squad tragically. As a result of this, in early December 2022, he had to undergo knee surgery, which meant he was out for 3 months. There was certainly meltdown amongst Arsenal fans at the prospect of having to use Eddie Nketiah during Jesus' lengthy absence as we chased the title. Eddie did okay for a bit, but ultimately his limitations showed, and Leandro Trossard came in and flourished as a false 9. When Jesus did return towards the end of March, despite having some good games, he didn't quite demonstrate the same sharpness that he'd shown earlier in the season. He then had an entire off-season and pre-season to regain that sharpness and looked fit and raring to go in some of our friendlies in the US. Our 5-3 victory over Barcelona stands out where his explosiveness looked reignited. He looked like the Jesus we'd seen at the beginning of last season, and in my prediction pre-season podcast, I said that he'd be our top goal scorer and player of the season. I was that confident that we had prime Gabriel Jesus back. However, just days before the Community Shield, these knee problems resurfaced and he missed the beginning of the season. He's gone on to have a further 2 knee injuries in 2024, missing a further 35 days of action. In total, he's missed 158 days through knee injuries in the last 18 months. In the 5 seasons prior to him joining Arsenal, He'd missed a total of 168 days through injury, 158 in 18 months and 168 in 5 years. He hadn't previously been a particularly injury-prone player, but he just hasn't been able to shake off this knee problem. Aside from some brilliant displays in the Champions League group stage earlier this season, he hasn't played with that same explosiveness that we're used to. While I think the combination play has remained at a high level, he's still able to drop in and contribute to the build-up, and his pressing work is still elite. This has come to the detriment of his goal threat. His non-penalty expected goals per 90 has dropped to 0.38, placing him in the 57th percentile for this metric. He's gone from getting great chances at a high rate to barely being above average at this skill. This has obviously inevitably led to a reduced goal tally. 4 league goals in 1,451 minutes this season equates to 0.25 goals per 90, or 1 every 4 games as opposed to the 1 in 2 he had been producing, which puts him in the 23rd percentile for goals per 90. This simply isn't a good enough return for a team that is fighting for major honours. A physically declining striker who can facilitate deep build-up, but to the detriment of his ability to still be a presence and a goal threat in the box. Remind you of anyone? There are murmurs that he'll need another knee operation in the summer. On the one hand, that gives me hope. Maybe he is just playing through an injury and he can get back to his best next season. On the other, it does suggest to me that maybe Arsenal aren't willing to take that risk on a player they're paying a considerable amount. If they can reinvest in someone who doesn't carry that risk, maybe that's why they're willing to move on from him. I think they also believe that Kai Havertz can take his spot in the squad on a permanent basis. And that brings me on to the other reason for Jesus' demise, the emergence of Kai as a 9. We obviously initially brought Havertz in to predominantly play the left 8 role, but as Jesus was injured and Eddie was phased out, the German got his chance at 9, and we've not looked back. As I outlined in my last video, which you should check out, Kai has thrived in this role and has produced nearing on elite output. He's able to drop in and contribute to the build-up like Jesus, perhaps to even a higher level, which is to be expected given he spent a lot of time as an 8 and a 10. However, he has the athleticism to still find himself featuring the press, still find himself making runs in behind and being a presence in the box. Crucially, however, Havertz at 9 has allowed Mikel Arteta to develop his system tactically and move away from an excellent but fundamentally flawed Alexander Zinchenko. Arteta's Arsenal in possession shape has in the past involved Zinchenko inverting into midfield and forming a box with the 6 and the 2 more advanced 8s. While with and without Zinchenko we've seen variations of how this box has formed this season, Arteta appears to have settled in recent weeks on utilising more traditional fullbacks and having the left 8 drop in next to the 6, with Havertz dropping in to form the final corner of the box as a dual 10 with Odegaard. This liberates Ben White to be even more of an overlapping option and allows Takehiro Tomiyasu or Jakub Kiwior on the left to take up more advanced positions. Whether Jesus could come in and fit in this dual 10 role in possession and out of possession, who knows, but Havertz is certainly a perfect fit for it. So not only has Jesus faltered physically, something we're unsure as to whether he can recover from, we've also evolved past him as a team to an extent. So are Arsenal right to listen to offers for him? In a literal sense, everyone has their price, barring maybe Odegaard, Rice, Saka and Saliba. I would say everyone is open to being sold if a ludicrous offer came in or some sort of acceptable offer. However, in the more nuanced sense, I think I'd personally say no. We already bemoan a lack of forward depth that we trust. If we let Jesus go, we're losing another who we'd then have to replace, on top of other additions we already need in the forward line. There's a chance Jesus can get back to his best, or even if he can get somewhere near it after his summer operation, then he's a player worth having in the squad. On the flip side, I wouldn't begrudge the club for wanting to move on from a player who we're paying considerable amounts and can't guarantee reliability and fitness and durability. Ultimately, it comes down to the physical projections on the player. Do they believe that these niggling knee injuries are an ongoing concern for a 27-year-old, or do they believe he can regain that sharpness? Yes, I'm kind of sitting on the fence, but it's hard to be definitive when you don't hold all the information. Essentially though, I do believe the club have enough justification to sell at a reasonable price, even if it's not my preferred solution. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the We Love You Arsenal channel, because we have a lot more content coming like this. Listen to our podcast, the Arsenal Cannon podcast, and we'll see you soon.